Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and interesting news and also create a little bit of a discussion topic regarding the brand new reveal of a new character added into the lore of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. If for some reason you haven't necessarily been keeping up, on the official Monster Hunter Twitter account for both Japanese and in North America for English users, they have been posting these kind of like lore dump sections, kind of like 3 pages worth of plenty of lore, giving us a little bit of a background story on just some of the characters that were introduced, not just on base Monster Hunter Rise, but also on Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, as they basically flesh out the story a little bit more. Remember that in the base game you do get plenty of dialogue, conversations, plenty of hints of information, but they don't necessarily delve a little bit too deep on that. So lately they have been doing these like individual character, like 3 pages worth of lore dump, and they're posting them on their social media. So I'm going to be leaving a link in the description below for pretty much all of the ones that they have been posting lately. Usually I've decided not to cover this because I don't necessarily focus too much on the lore in the game. With that said, however, in the most recent one where they started to speak about Fugen and Haman and this brand new character named Serene, they started to provide us information on what essentially happened 50 years ago in Komura village after the original Rampage attack. And at the same time, they introduced this brand new character called Serene, a female hunter or a female villager, if you will, that also has a lot of connections to what a lot of people are suggesting Matsuru Tsushi, whether she ended up being her teacher or she ended up being his mother. We don't necessarily know. That's not necessarily clearly detailed in the lore that they're providing us. But more importantly than that, some people have suggested that they might end up adding her as a like downloadable voice pack type of character. Remember that on base Monster Hunter Rise, we ended up getting the addition of both Cool Girl and Big Bro. These were 2 essentially characters that were kind of made up out of nowhere. They appeared originally in the concept art for base Monster Hunter Rise early on, but they never were fully implemented into the game. Cool Girl, I believe, is the niece of Fugen, and Big Bro is a childhood friend of hers, but also just a normal hunter in the village. They never actually made an appearance in the game whatsoever, not even in the base story. They were only added as additional voice packs. And at the same time, they also ended up adding both Mood Swings and Royal Pain. These are the 2 characters now that we get to see related to the Royal Knights in Elgato as well. And they also ended up becoming a part of the addition of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak's official lore. So a lot of people have started to suggest that perhaps this brand new character, Serene, is also going to end up getting the same treatment, that they end up adding her as a downloadable voice pack type of character. Maybe one of those like layered armor sets type of things where you end up kind of like dressing up your character however it is that she looks, and of course she ends up being part of the official lore in the game, not just necessarily outside of it, as they continue to provide us with these kind of like lore information, story details, as they introduce more and more characters. And this is kind of like the thing that I wanted to discuss, just the potential of the inclusion of even more characters in the same way that they did for base Monster Hunter Rise. Because I think the inclusion of a brand new character, especially in the way that they're doing it with introduction of brand new lore, is really well implemented, especially in the way that they're handling as of late. Where if they continue to introduce more characters based on these kind of like lore informations, as they talk a little bit more about just what happened in Komura Village in the past, but also what is potentially happening between other specific points in the story that where you don't necessarily get to see a lot of the information, is going to be interesting in the way that they continue to add more and more characters. And of course, if they end up being paid DLC, is going to be a good way to go about it. Specifically, I do want to talk, I don't want to read the whole thing for Serene, but they do specifically mention in the little bit of details that they talk about her, that she's a young girl from the village, that she just turned 10, but ever since she got a pair of dual blades, she's been training every day to become a hunter. Essentially, the story here takes place right after the calamity where they were dealing with plenty of monsters attacking the village, and then soon after that, Magnamalo showed up. So Fugen and of course a relatively much younger Master Hojo ended up kind of like dealing with it, but still just kind of like fended it off. They didn't necessarily kill it. Do remember that in the base lore in the game, they do mention that Hammond actually ended up defeating Magnamalo, and this is why we ended up getting Scorn Magnamalo, as he's kind of like back for revenge. So that is like that lore information that we do know that is not necessarily mentioned specifically here. Specifically when it comes to Serene, they do mention that she tried to get into the hunt, into the fight, of course, but they wouldn't necessarily fight because she's not a hunter as of right then and there, and they needed to protect the village, and that meant her, including everyone there as well. And the entire idea of the stronghold, presumably where you fight the actual rampage itself, this is something that Hammond suggested and something that all of the villagers decided to kind of help build, as pretty much after they dealt with Magnamalo and all the other monsters at the same time, they basically just figured out that they just can't let them run around. So kind of like narrowing down a little bit of how they actually fight them is one of the best ways to be able to handle them. She mentions that because of the steelworks, everyone knows how to use a weapon, and she would like for the Elder to come up with a way to be able to handle the rampage for not just hunters, but basically for everyone around the village. This is where Fugen steps in and decides that he's gonna begin to train her for her to become a bit stronger as well. And Hojo intervenes that she is gonna need a master license from the guild if she wants to be able to be trained and also train others at the same time. And then she says this very specific, interesting line where she turned to the villagers and raised her beloved dual blades and states that, "Alright everyone, starting today you're all my beloved pupils, and your first task is to eat and sleep. We'll need all the energy before we start training." So of course this is where a lot of people begin to suggest that she might end up being actually Master Utsushi's mother, but I think most likely she ended up being his trainer, and most likely one of the trainers that ended up training pretty much all of the hunters that you actually get to see in the village before Utsushi took over. Now, of course, in the game's lore itself, Utsushi doesn't necessarily mention who his trainer was. I think there might be a casual line here or there, but they certainly never mention her name or that she was even a female to begin with, so we don't necessarily know anything about that. We also don't necessarily know anything about where he came from either, so we presumably know that he's from Komura Village, but of course, that's not necessarily detailed as well. So that's just some of the story lore connections that we do specifically have for this brand new character that they decided to introduce, Serene. And alongside that, of course, you should probably have already seen both the concept arts that they provided, one that was black and white with them being Hammond, Fugen, and of course Serene, relatively young, but also one in color as well, when they're kind of waiting for her at the entrance of the Komura Village, where you can actually see a little bit of the entrance being completely destroyed as well, as you see relatively a couple of other hunters in the background as well. A little more blurry because of the art, but you actually do get to see Master Hojo and a few others as well. So as for Capcom introducing this character and many others, presumably as a story paid DLC characters and voice packs, we're just gonna have to wait and see. It's certainly an interesting way for them to go about them providing us with just more, not only interesting lore for the game, but also of course more of a little bit of a connection that you can certainly have with some of the characters. Remember that when they introduced Salvo, the commander of the Cavaliers, and when they introduced Paz, the first one in charge of the Cavaliers, they basically had like no direct connection to base Monster Hunter Rise. They just basically ended up confirming afterwards that they would end up being like story characters in Sunbreak, so we didn't necessarily have any sort of connection with them whatsoever. And as far as Big Bro and Cool Girl, we never actually ended up getting to see them in game whatsoever, only a little bit of a lore information, but of course they never appeared in game, not even in the texts. So, you know, it's a little bit of a bummer that we never get to see them. Of course, they ended up getting voiced and even paid, you know, like skins and stuff. So we just never actually ended up seeing them fully implemented in the game. And hopefully Serene doesn't necessarily get that treatment, and we do end up seeing her in the game in one way, shape, or form. But that's about all the information that I wanted to go over. Certainly want to hear your guys' feedback on this. What do you think about the introduction of more characters in that format? And of course, would you be interested in purchasing some of those sound packs for sure? If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.